Lūdzu, ieņemiet.
Estimados colegas,
Dear colleagues, please take your seats.
les ruego que tomen asiento, por favor.
Dāmas un kungi,
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and distinguished delegates, it is my great honor to welcome you to the third parliamentary summit of the International Crimea Platform here in Riga. Today, we stand united in our commitment to uphold international law and support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This platform symbolizes our collective resolve to bring attention to the ongoing Russian aggression, Russia's illegal attempt to redraw borders by military force, repressions, and crimes in Crimea and other temporarily occupied territories, and to work towards restoring peace and justice in the region. Dear colleagues, before we proceed with our agenda, let us watch a short opening video.
This war feels personal. Of Russian imperialism. Those who have endured the repressions of Soviet power recognize this situation very well. The conquest of territories, the destruction
Пані та панове, дозвольте мені запросити
Ladies and gentlemen, let me give floor to the host of this reception today, Speaker of the Sejm of the Latvian Republic, Madam Daiga Marini. Please.
augsti godā
Honorable Mr. Stefanchuk, Honorable Madam Silinya, Madam Braja, dear colleagues, hello, and it is truly an honor and a genuine pleasure to welcome you here in such great numbers. And it is a pleasure to welcome you to the third parliamentary summit of the International Crimea Platform here in Riga. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to each of you for responding to the invitation sent out by myself and my Ukrainian colleague. We have gathered in Riga today to express our steadfast support for Ukraine and to uphold the principles of international law. I would also like to thank my Ukrainian colleague Ruslan for his wonderful collaboration in organizing this summit. I'm honored to work closely with Ruslan, who continues to exemplify admirable parliamentary leadership in these challenging times of war. Furthermore, I wish to thank the President of Latvia, my colleagues in the Saima, and the government for their cooperation and support in the organization of this summit. This summit truly exemplifies the power of teamwork. Dear colleagues and dear friends, the international community's policy of non recognition regarding the occupation of the Baltic states was invaluable in Latvia's journey to restoring our independence. This policy of non recognition of the occupation encouraged Latvians to persevere and also lent legitimacy to our fight for independence. Today, similar encouragement and international legal framework is needed by Ukraine and its people. Just as we consistently asserted the non recognition of the occupation of the Baltic states, we must now reiterate, as if it were a mantra, that Crimea is Ukraine, that Russia's attempts to alter borders through military force are illegal, and that the crimes committed by Russia will not be ignored. Those responsible will be prosecuted and held accountable. It is our duty to express unequivocally and emphatically that the international community will not tolerate Russian imperialism. Moreover, it is the responsibility of Russian society itself to clearly reject and counteract Russian imperialism and its crimes associated with it. This would be a reasonable expectation from at least those Russians who have currently found refuge in democratic countries that uphold freedom of expression. Dear colleagues, we must continue to shed light on Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea and other Ukrainian territories, on the countless and systematic crimes perpetrated here. We must continue to document and record all of the crimes perpetrated, such as human rights violations, deportations, the displacement of children, forced changes in the population structure, the repression of Crimean Tatars, and the militarization of the occupied territories. Careful and sustained work is needed to document crimes and ensure accountability for the aggression and for each and every barbaric war crime committed in Ukraine against the Ukrainian people, including the Crimean Tatars. It is our duty to hold the perpetrators accountable for these gross violations of international law, for the atrocities of Russia's aggression, because impunity encourages other potential aggressors.
There can be no sustainable peace and security without justice. Dear friends, Ukraine is currently fighting not only for its territorial integrity, but also for the preservation of a system of international relations that is grounded in the rule of law and peaceful cooperation. We have built our security and prosperity upon a framework of international relations established by the UN Charter, which we often take for granted. However, the existing system is more fragile than we might imagine. The distinction between the rule of law and the rule of power may often go unnoticed by our citizens, but it is starkly evident. There is no in between. An altered world order where one can achieve their aims through brute force and aggression would impact us all, whether we live in Europe, Africa, Asia, or the Americas. That is why I am particularly encouraged by the broad representation of countries at this summit, which clearly demonstrates that Ukraine is not alone in this fight for values, for international law, and for justice. Thank you once again for your presence, your contribution to our collective efforts. I sincerely hope that they will lead to a victory. Dear friends, Slava Ukraini! Dear colleagues, we have an online link up with Kiev planned to hear an address by President Zelensky, and this link up will be at 10:30. So at the moment, I have the honor of giving the floor to the Prime Minister of the Republic of Latvia. Madam Prime Minister, please, the floor is yours.
Stefanchuk, dear Speaker Dagmieriņa, dear speakers, excellencies, colleagues. It's my honor to welcome you on Riga's third International Crimea Platform for Parliamentary Summit. I'm grateful for your presence and support to the Crimea Platform and its goals. Our main goal is to reach just peace in Ukraine. For this to happen, we need to stop Russia and force it out of Ukraine. We believe, as Latvians, Ukraine can win this war if international partners provide decisive political and military support. Latvia does its part to achieve Ukraine's victory. Excellencies, dear colleagues, Latvian people remember what it means to live under the evil of Moscow's occupation. What Russia is doing in Crimea and other parts of Ukraine since 2014 reminds us of 50 years of Soviet occupation in Latvia. Russia is killing Ukrainian people. Russia is abducting Ukrainian children and repressing Crimean Tatars. Ukraine fights back and resists. The brave Ukrainian struggle is an inspiration for the entire world. This is why we see a mirror of ourselves in Ukraine and Ukrainians. In Ukraine, we see our hopes, our values, and our love for freedom as well. Dear summit participants, we continue to provide military support to Ukraine of 0.25% of GDP of Latvia also next year, this year, next year, and years to come. Latvia has been a strong advocate for Ukraine's freedom as well politically. We continue non-military support to Ukraine, including in areas as energy, security, demining assistance to frontline communities, human rights and justice. And we will continue to improve implementation of sanctions. In Latvia, it's not just government, but also Latvian people, private and non-governmental sectors that continue to help Ukraine as much as possible. As a member state of EU and NATO, Latvia will continue to support Ukraine to the irreversible path of joining NATO and the EU. We strongly believe that Ukraine's future lies in just peace, security, and prosperity among other allies and partners in Euro-Atlantic community. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you to Madam Prime Minister. Now I have the great honor of giving the floor to my colleague and friend, the co-chair of the summit and co-organizer of the summit, the chairman of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, Mr. Ruslan Stefanchuk. Please, the floor is yours.
Вельмишановна
Dear Ms. Speaker of the Saima, dear Daigo, dear Prime Minister, dear Madam Minister for Foreign Affairs, dear participants of the Third Parliamentary Summit of the International Crimean Platform, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank our Latvian friends and partners for the initiative to host the Third Parliamentary Summit of the Crimean Platform and for successful preparation and excellent organization of this forum. Let me also thank the speakers here present, the speakers of the Croatian and Czech parliaments, Gordan Jandrokovic, Marketa Pekarova-Adamova, and Miloš Vstrich, who are here with us today, and for the successful organization of the previous two summits in Zagreb and Prague. I'm pleased that the circle of hosts of the parliamentary dimension of the Crimean Platform has been expanded today by our friendly Latvia. Latvia is well aware that 80 years ago, the Crimean Tatar went through terrible events when Stalin deported them from Crimea to remote areas of the Soviet Union within 3 days, because Latvia itself went through the Soviet-Russian occupation, deportation, and repressions. Friends, if you have not yet visited the Riga Museum of the Occupation of Latvia, I strongly advise you to visit it. I am still under very strong impression by its exhibition. While going through it, you feel the icy cold that comes from the times of the occupation and 2 ways of deportation. You hear exhausted voices tearing out of the old photographs. You see the undescribable pain in the eyes of the tortured but unconquered Latvians. And when you walk through the museum labyrinths of history and human destinies, you will realize that the occupation of Latvia, the deportation of the Crimean Tatar people, and the current aggression of Russia against Ukraine are links of the same chain, of the chain of Russian hatred and impunity. The evil that was once unpunished is manifesting itself today. The evil that is unpunished today will definitely manifest itself in the future. It's just a matter of time. For the 3rd year in a row, we are gathering for the Parliamentary Summit of the International Crimean Platform, and for 10 years have passed since the occupation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And although the occupying Russian authorities have done everything possible over the past 10 years to turn Crimea into their military foothold, change its ethnic composition, to sow fear and obedience among the people, Crimea has not moved away from Ukraine 1 iota. It has become even closer, more precious, and more desirable to us. We will never give up Crimea, just as we will never give up a single piece of Ukrainian land temporarily occupied by the aggressor. For us, the liberation of Crimea has no alternatives. This is our land and our people live there. Like people like Nariman Jalal, our Crimean and Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar hero who went through the hell of Russian prisons and whom we managed to rescue from Russian clutches. Such worthy sons and daughters of the Crimean Tatar people are here with us as Arifat Chubarov, Akhtem Chigois, Tamila Tasheva, and many other glorious people. I'll ask you to applaud Nariman Jalal, who was released from Russian captivity exactly 4 months ago, as well as the entire Crimean Tatar people who dream so much of liberation from the Russian yoke and life in a Ukraine liberated from the occupiers. The Crimean Tatar people also dream of restoring justice, which should be the recognition of their deportation as an act of genocide, as the parliaments of Latvia, Lithuania, Canada, and Estonia have done already. Dear colleagues, speakers, vice speakers, representatives of parliaments, I would ask you to follow the example of these countries and consider the possibility of adopting similar decisions in your parliaments. Dear participants of the summit, the struggle for the return of Crimea is an inseparable part of Ukraine's struggle for freedom and independence. Allow me to outline the priorities of this fight. For instance, those where we need your help most today. I ask each of you to contribute to increasing military support for Ukraine. Ukrainian cities need air defense systems. We need to close the skies finally and protect our citizens. I ask you to facilitate the authorization of Ukraine's neighboring EU and NATO countries to shoot down enemy missiles and drones that reach the western borders of our country. It is important for us to remove any restrictions on the provision and use of long-range weapons against legitimate military objects and targets in the territory of the Russian Federation. We expect additional decisions on the supply of F-16 aircraft. The cold weather is approaching, so we're asking for support for Ukraine's energy sector. We also need to increase the sanctions pressure on the aggressor and leave no room for circumventing the sanctions. Russia must be held accountable for all of its crimes, and this requires international legal mechanisms. And the priority has to be the creation of an international compensation mechanism of the damages caused by aggressor. Dear colleagues, Ukraine is fighting, but it dreams of peace. At all international platforms, we're talking about President Volodymyr Zelensky's peace formula. This year, important steps were taken to implement it. The first Global Peace Summit, which took place in June this year, was a clear signal to Russia that the global world does not support its aggressive war against Ukraine. All participants of the summit supported the territorial integrity of Ukraine in its internationally recognized borders. And now comes the decisive moment of the war. Ukraine has a clear vision of how to achieve a turning point in the war. Last week, the president of Ukraine presented the victory plan to the Ukrainian parliament. Let me present it to you briefly. First, we expect Ukraine to be invited to join NATO soon. The very fact of such an invitation could be fundamental for peace and will demonstrate to the Russian aggressor that its geopolitical calculations are losing. This is the initial starting point of the victory plan. Secondly, it is important to strengthen Ukraine's defense. The implementation of this point provides the continuation of operations of the defense forces and the destruction of Russian offensive potential in the occupied territories. The third point is to deter the aggressor. Russia must understand the futility of further offensive, and for this purpose, we propose to deploy a comprehensive non-nuclear strategic deterrence package in our territory. The next, fourth point, concerns strategic economic potential. Ukraine has rich deposits of critical resources, and we propose that strategic partners enter into a special agreement to jointly protect the country's critical resources, invest in and use them jointly. Finally, point 5 is intended to be implemented after the war is over. This paragraph provides for Ukraine's inclusion in the European defense system. We will be ready to provide Europe with highly professional, motivated, and experienced Ukrainian military units. I ask you, dear participants of the summit, to support the victory plan of Ukraine as we, the Ukrainian parliamentarians, have done, including those present in this room. Dear friends, Ukraine continues its struggle for freedom and independence, for Crimea, for Donbass, for Sumy and Kherson, for Kharkiv and Zaporizhia. Every day, every hour, every minute. This night, the Russian missiles and Iranian Shahid drones were killing us again. I have a proposal to you, dear colleagues. In order to feel what Ukrainians feel, what my countrymen are feeling, I would ask you to install an app on your smartphones which gives a signal of air raid alarms, which is a signal of when it starts. And you will feel what we feel every day, every hour, every minute. 2 nuclear-armed states and 1 state close to developing nuclear weapons are fighting against Ukraine, and one of these states simply wants to wipe us off the face of the earth. Another one produces, improves, and supplies it with deadly Shahid drones. And the third sends its soldiers to Ukraine to kill us every day, every hour, every minute. So, dear friends, once again, I ask you to unite even more to help Ukraine, because it is not just about us. In fact, it is about you as well. It is about how the world will live and how the world will develop in the coming decades. Will it humbly follow the path of tyranny, or will it choose the triumph of law, democracy, and justice? So I want to honestly ask each and every one of you, is the democratic world unable to protect a country that wants to be part of it? Are we not able to repel aggression together? Is democracy weaker than tyranny? Ukraine and Ukrainians need answers to these painful yet vital questions more than ever. Every day, every hour, every minute. Dear friends, I thank you for your attention. Glory to Ukraine.
Paldies, priekšsēdētāj.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I have the honor to give the floor to the Latvian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Baiba Braže. Please.
Mieriņas kundze, Madam Speaker, Chairman of the Verkhovna Rada, Mr. Stefanchuk, dear speakers, vice speakers, leaders, dear friends of Ukraine, and dear friends from Crimea. Here in Riga, we know the importance of never recognizing foreign occupation by an aggressor state, by a brutal colonial power. No matter how bleak the prospects for liberation may seem, and no matter how long the occupation may last. So let me be crystal clear. Latvia will never recognize the occupation of Crimea, of Sevastopol, or any other region of Ukraine. Crimea is Ukraine, and we look forward to Ukraine free and whole. Ladies and gentlemen, Crimea is a symbol of Russian aggression. The war did not start in February 22. It began in 2014, when Russia bluntly shattered international law and attacked Ukraine's territorial integrity and independence. To this day, the human suffering caused by Russian aggression continues to mount. Russia has murdered thousands of civilians and it continues to attack. It attacks energy infrastructure, it attacks civilians, hospitals, and other infrastructure. It seeks to freeze Ukraine into submission. Russia also continues deportations, including those of Crimean Tatars, stolen Ukrainian children from the occupied territories. It brings them to Russia, and it is a behavior of the last colonial power in Europe. Russia is seeking to destroy our way of life, to destroy fundamental freedoms, to destroy UN Charter, human rights. It attacks everything that we who are here stand for. It is the greatest threat to not only Ukraine, but to all our security. So Russia must be stopped. We also know that the spirit of Ukrainians will not be broken. That is why today we have that moral obligation to show political leadership. And that is what we are doing from all continents, from all parts of the world. We are showing leadership, that those principles that we stand for matter. So I thank you very much for being here and standing with Ukraine and standing for all principles we have signed up to. The core purpose of this platform, of course, is to put an end to the occupation of Crimea, to highlight that Crimea is an indivisible part of Ukraine. So I highly appreciate the tireless work done by the Ukraine's President's office, by the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Republic of Crimea, as well as the Crimean Tatar community and the Crimea Platform Expert Network. I also thank our colleagues in the Parliament, across the government, in Prime Minister's office, and everywhere across the human networks that we have in Latvia standing for Ukraine. It was really a joint work, not only by all branches of power, but by the whole of society. I also would like to address a point on accountability for crimes committed by Russia. It is known who they are. The names of murderers, rapists, architects of the aggression. It will require our leadership to bring them to justice. So establishing a special tribunal with cross-regional support to hold Russia accountable is what we are aiming to do. Failure to act will undermine the prospects for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. The principle of respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of states is a vital element of Ukraine's peace formula. And in this regard, Latvia will host a high-level discussion on restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity right after this summit. So, dear leaders, we all know, our objective has not changed. Our support for Ukraine's victory is also our support for the global principles. And that will to achieve that victory is unwavering. As far as Latvia is concerned, we will continue providing Ukraine with all the possible assistance: military, financial, humanitarian, political, everything we can. And we hope to see similar engagement from across the world. Obviously, in various terms, what is possible from different countries. We believe in a world where Ukraine has prevailed. We believe in a world where every last occupant has been expelled from Ukrainian territory. We believe in a world where Ukraine is whole and free, where it is part of the EU and NATO, if it wants to be. Crimea is Ukraine. Krima ir un vienmēr būs Ukraina.
Crimea is and always be Ukraine.
Paldies, ministres kundze, un tagad
Thank you, Madam Minister. And before we start our plenary session, I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Mr. Jalal, First Deputy Chairman of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people. Please, Mr. Deputy Chairman, you have the floor.
Вельми шановні голови та члени делегації.
Dear speakers, vice speakers, heads of international delegations, on behalf of Crimean Tatar Mejlis, I would like to express our gratitude to Latvia for having organized the third parliamentary summit of the International Crimean Platform. I thank you, dear co-organizers of this summit and dear representatives of those countries who stand with Ukraine, stand with Crimean Tatar people, and support us in our striving to restore our rights and our ability to further live freely on our land. And thank you for recognition unlawful deportation of Crimean Tatar people in 1944 as a genocide. I believe that the parliaments of other countries, members of International Crimea Platform, will adopt similar decisions soon. Dear friends and colleagues, 11 years already, Crimea is being occupied by Russia. It is the territory of fear, territory of terror, where forced abduction is happening, kidnapping of activists is happening, and liberties and human rights are violated. Thousands of people became political prisoners. 136 individuals are Crimean Tatars, and they became political prisoners. Representatives of the elected body of Crimean Tatar people, Mejlis, they were taken into prisons as political prisoners. Lately, Crimea has been used as a springboard to launch attacks over Ukraine to kill civilians. Thousands of Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians were forced to flee Crimea to avoid forced mobilization, not to be drafted into the Russian army, and not to be forced to fight against their own state of Ukraine. Russia is continuing to implant Russian people in Crimea and is continuing to distort the awareness and the perception of information by the residents of Crimea to distort our history and our cultural heritage. We understand that for as long as the occupation is ongoing, those unlawful actions will be continued by Russia, and our position should be crystal clear. The Russian war on Ukraine has begun in Crimea, and it should be ended with liberation of Crimea. And no endeavors of the aggressor state will ever achieve their intended target. As President Zelensky stated, Ukraine is not trading its own land and is not abandoning Ukrainians and our own people. We believe that the entire territory of Ukraine will be liberated and deoccupied, including Crimea. Dear friends, victory of Ukraine, liberation of occupied Crimea, and reinstating sovereignty of Ukraine, including in the territory of Crimea, will be essential and crucial in our striving to restoring our rights and liberties. Crimea is the homeland of Crimean Tatars. Crimea is an integral part of sovereign Ukrainian state. Reintegration of the occupied peninsula into the economic and political space of Ukraine will have to provide for the right of Crimean Tatar people to exercise its autonomy within the framework of political rights according to the Constitution of Ukraine, which guarantees equal rights and freedoms to all residents of Crimean Peninsula. Territorial autonomy of Crimea will make further attempts of Russia to take under control the Ukrainian territory and Crimea in the future. It will render it impossible if territorial autonomy of Crimea is reinstated. We'll continue our efforts, our struggle, and coming to an end of my speech, I would like to express my gratitude to the armed forces of Ukraine. Thank you for your attention, and glory to Ukraine.
Liels paldies, priekšsēdētāj.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Chairman, for your powerful message and somber reminder of the brutal nature of the Russian repression machine. Dear colleagues, we have now concluded the opening ceremony of the summit. I wish to thank Prime Minister Silinga for joining us. I understand she has other engagements she has to attend to. Thank you once again. As we start the plenary session of the Third Parliamentary Summit of the International Crimea Platform, let me just make a couple of technical remarks. This session is scheduled until 11 o'clock. Then we will have a family photo and a coffee break. The session will then resume and last until 2 p.m. when it will conclude. We will also adopt a joint statement. The final text of the statement is now available on the summit webpage. Please use the QR codes on your badges to access the latest document. Other documents linked to the summit are also available there. I kindly remind all participants that the speaking time will be limited to 3 minutes. I repeat, 3 minutes. The order of speakers is available on the summit webpage. To access it, as I already mentioned, please use the QR codes on your badges. Changes to the list are no longer possible. Yet, if an exceptional emergency issue arises, please talk to the technical desk. When you are given the floor, please activate the microphone, pressing the on button next to you. And after you end your speech, press it again to turn the microphone off. Our first speaker of the plenary session will be a representative of the Crimea Platform Expert Network, Mr. Bernatsky, who will give us an overview of the situation in the occupied Crimea. He will be followed by the second speaker according to the speakers list. Mr. Bernatsky, you have 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Your Excellencies, members of Parliament, it's a great honor, it's a great pleasure to speak today on the behalf of Crimean Platform Expert Network and present and touch upon issues related to sanctions and their political dimension, what actually can be done at parliamentarian level within and outside Crimean platform. So first of all, I would say that a lot has been done in relations to sanctions, and we are really grateful for your insistent work in this track, and it's very inspiring to see that many Russian warmongers, propagandists, war criminals, they have designated Russian military-industrial complex under huge sanctions, and the work should be developed and strengthened further, and we have a lot of aspects which we should cover in the future. First of all is that at parliamentarian level, you could obviously address your colleagues from third countries, especially when you visiting them or they visiting you, in respect to what can be done in third countries, in Central Asia, for instance, in China, in Asian countries, abroad, in African countries, how they could help to develop the legislation which will not allow to circumvent European sanctions against Russia, and what legal steps should be taken. And you could advise them on how to integrate the best practices related to implementation of European Union, United States, and Ukrainian sanctions with respect to the aggressive war against Ukraine. Secondly, the scope and framework of personal sanctions and sectoral sanctions should be expanded, and more targets should be put under the sanctions. For instance, 2 million Russians working in the military-industrial business or corporations. About 1,300 companies are working in military sector of Russia, and not all of them from these companies are under sanctions. So directors, deputy directors, those people who are responsible for engineering, constructing missiles which target Ukrainian peaceful cities still can enjoy their luxury life in Europe, spending millions of bloody rubles gained on the unjustified war. So thank you a lot for your attention, and it's just a political track which can be developed and strengthened further. Thank you again.
Jā, liels paldies Bernatska kungam.
Thank you, Mr. Bernatsky. Now I give floor to Madam Markéta Pekarová-Adamová, Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies of the Parliament of the Czech Republic.
Dear Speaker Mirjana, dear Speaker Stefanchuk, ladies and gentlemen. Last month I was in Ukraine, in Lviv. We have opened one of common humanitarian projects, maternity hospital in the shelter. Women are giving birth to their children in the shelter. Can you imagine? This is the reality of Ukraine today. During such events, I'm asking myself, are we doing enough to Ukraine? The Crimean Peninsula plays a prominent role in the context of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and we must indeed make sure that it does not lose the attention of the work public. But this, let's be honest, is not enough. Keeping the issue of Crimea on the agenda is important, but it in itself will not bring freedom back to the inhabitants of Crimea. It will not help the abducted children to come back to their families, nor will it restore the territorial integrity of Ukraine, nor will it serve international law. The only way to restore freedom and justice in Crimea and the whole of Ukraine is to win the war. In last several months, the morale in our capitals has been in decline. True, most of the news from the front line has not been encouraging. Yet if we zoom out and look at the big picture, the situation is not so gloomy. Russia had to trade tens of thousands of human lives and billions of dollars for minimal territorial gains. Ukraine, on the other hand, is capable of striking strategic targets deep into the Russian-held territory, including Crimea. Russia has been denied control of most of the Black Sea, and the Ukrainian army even controls part of the Kursk region. Dear colleagues, I am sure that Ukraine can win this war and that it can happen relatively soon. I even think the victory could have been achieved long ago, and we would not have to worry about the so-called fatigue. Russia may be a giant, but it has very fragile feet of clay. It tries to intimidate us with feeble threats and fake red lines. We must call the bluff. If we make the right choices, the aggressors can be defeated. More military assistance without pointless restrictions, more economic support, more efficient sanctions, more political and diplomatic support. The ingredients are known and available. It is our responsibility as political leaders to mobilize the political will. Many people in our countries are tired of war and afraid of escalation. Therefore, it is our obligation to achieve a just peace. Peace through strength and victory. We can do this, ladies and gentlemen, and therefore we must, for the sake of Crimea, Ukraine, and our nations. Thank you very much.
Paldies, Markēte, un tagad
Thank you, Marketa. The next speaker will be Miloš Vystričil, Speaker of the Senate of the Parliament of the Czech Republic. And after that, we will hear from Gordon Jandrkovic.
Milí Ruslané,
Dear Ruslan, dear participants of the third Crimean platform, I'm very glad that we are meeting again. And I think that we have to realize what are the times in which we live. 80 years have passed since the deportation of Crimean Tatars from Crimea on the order of Stalin. 10 years have elapsed since the unlawful annexation of Crimea on the order of Putin. More than 3 years have elapsed since our first meeting in Kiev at the summit, where we started all to strive to deoccupy Crimea. And before that, we were not heard much. And more than 2.5 years have elapsed after the invasion of Russia against Ukraine. I am convinced that only after that, democratic countries have sobered up and realized that they lived in a great error and mistake. A part of European countries lived in error. And the error was that the guarantee of lasting coexistence with non-democratic country is based on economic cooperation, can be the relations of our economies, but we know that it doesn't exist. It was wrong. And our task is to learn the lessons of this mistake and realize that today, all around the world, the struggle between democracy and tyranny is taking place, as Ruslan Stefanchuk said. And we have to support the countries that fight for democracy. And Ukraine is one of these countries. Ukraine is today the center of what we are deciding about, whether tyranny will prevail or whether democracy will win. And we do not realize this in our countries. We are losing battles in economy, competitiveness. We are not good enough in informing our people who afterwards are under the influence of populists and extremists. And all this is in front of us, and we have to face it. And at the first place, we have to support Ukraine, support the struggle of Ukraine, because in Ukraine, the struggle is for us, and the future of Ukraine is our future. If we do not realize this, Ukraine will lose, and afterwards we will all lose. This is how it is. It's so simple. An old wisdom said that for the victory of evil, it is enough that good people do nothing. And I will be more strict. It seems that for the victory of evil, it is enough when good people are doing little. So please, let's do more than we are still doing. Glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
tagad vārds Gordanam.
I now give the floor to Mr. Gordon Jandrkovic, Speaker of the Croatian Parliament. Afterwards, we will hear from Barbel Bas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I congratulate you for the excellent organization of this summit. The high-level turnout today demonstrates that our parliaments remain with Ukraine's people in Crimea and beyond. Dear Ruslan, dear colleagues, this year marks 8 years since the forced deportations of Crimean Tatars. That confirms Russian long-lasting plan to conquer this ethnic group and also Ukraine as a whole. But the heroic struggle of Ukraine continues for almost 1,000 days now. In parallel, the Kremlin persists in globally spreading its many-sided malign influence. Misinformation and manipulation from Moscow threaten our democracies and our values. We see especially dangerous examples of this in Moldova these days. We observe it in the Western Balkans all the time, but unfortunately in EU countries too, Politicians there can also be heavily influenced by Russian narrative. This creates instabilities which only add ammunition to Russia's war machine, and it motivates the aggressor to push harder on the front lines, in cyber actions, and in propaganda. Ladies and gentlemen, many were not aware how fragile was the balance that enabled decades of peace in the most of Europe. The exception was former Yugoslavia in the 1990s. There, the communist mindset and aggressive nationalism tried to prevent, in blood, the legal claims for freedom, democracy, and independence, just like Russia in Ukraine. From that experience comes the particular understanding of Russian people for Ukrainians. That is why 2 weeks ago we hosted the third Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit in Dubrovnik, gathering President Zelensky and leaders from the region. 2 years ago in Zagreb, we co-hosted the first parliamentary summit of the International Crimea Platform. Last year, we organized the International Donors Conference on Humanitarian Demining of Ukraine. Because after the war comes a time for reconstruction and recovery, and a time when Ukraine, free and whole, will join us in the EU. Distinguished colleagues, authoritarians are collaborating intensively. The latest examples is the news of North Korean soldiers arriving to Russia. So, as Putin keeps looking for alliances, we need to strengthen our own cooperation and partnerships. At the same time, we need to prevent that small cracks in our unity become more significant holes. Today's summit is a great opportunity to work on this at parliamentary level. We don't want to go down in history as a generation that allowed authoritarian regimes to determine the future of our societies. We need to remain firmly with Ukraine to stand for the respect of international law and the rules-based order. Dear friends, these are historically critical times indeed, so let's never underestimate the practical value that our unity and support have for Ukraine. We must keep it up. Thank you.
Paldies, Jandrokoviča.
Thank you, Mr. Jandrokovic. And now I give the floor to Madam Barbel Boss, Speaker of the German Bundestag, followed by Mr. Shimon Holovny.
Dank, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Zu Beginn möchte ich mich auch.
Thank you, dear colleagues. First of all, I wish to express thanks to our colleagues, Daiga, Mirina, and Ruslan Stefanchuk. Thank you very much for organizing the third Crimean Platform Conference. Now, for all of us, this is a very important signal that we're sending out from this conference today. We stand firmly by Ukraine's side. The international alliance is steadfast, even in turbulent times, and the international community has never recognized the annexation of Crimea. The annexation dating back to 2014 is and remains illegal under international law, as are all other further territorial conquests since 2022. Russia's action is an attack on our European security order and an attack on international law. This conflict has a global dimension. Therefore, it's important that we all send out a signal from this conference, a signal to be sent out into the world, especially to those who are not yet on board. This community needs to become larger. The Russian occupiers are trampling on freedom and human rights in Crimea and other regions of Ukraine. There are gross human rights violations occurring there. Let me just give you a few examples. Ukrainian POWs are being tortured. Ukrainian children are being abducted and taken to Russia. Ukrainian identity is suppressed. Listening to Ukrainian songs alone will bring you to jail, or the same goes for possessing the blue-yellow national flag. This will mean that you're put in prison. It's important that in our final statement today, we demand that the Russian crimes be investigated and that political prisoners be released. Germany is a decisive supporter of Ukraine and will continue doing so. Let me just give you an example dating back to June 2024. there was a large-scale reconstruction conference in Berlin. President Zelensky came to the German Bundestag and made it quite clear that he wants a peace perspective. But for this to happen, he needs support given by the international community. What we also need is an exchange among our parliaments. In mid-October 2024, President Zelensky came to Germany again, demanding further military aid. The defense ministers at the G7 meeting reaffirmed this support once more. Now, Ukraine needs our support, and it also needs the EU as well as NATO perspectives. Thank you very much for having listened to me.
Thank you, Madam Boss. I now give the floor to Szymon Hołownia, Speaker of the Sejm of the Republic of Poland. Afterwards, Lauri Husar.
Dear Deiga, dear Ruslan, dear colleagues, thank you very much for inviting us all for this assembly. And as you probably know, they are sometimes saying about meetings like this, they are all about words. But words are crucial because always everything starts with words. And the actions of governments, of presidents, of military forces, they followed the words we are saying. That's why the most important thing for us and the most important task of us today is to send proper words to the world from this very place. The words of respect, not the words of hatred, the words of love, not the words of violence. We should be sure that we are on the right place with the right words in our heads, on our mouths, because the whole world is listening to us. And our governments will follow, and our presidents will follow what we will be saying today. Because today here we are the voices of our parliaments, but we are the voice of the voiceless as well. I mean, especially the parliament of the Crimea, the Medjis, which was made voiceless, which was abolished by the Russian occupants. Right now and right here, we should say simple words and simple truths to be heard by all the people in the world who want to hear. The first thing is that, as Madam Foreign Minister said already, this war started in 2014, and we slept over the first 8 years of it. The second thing is Crimea is Ukraine. The third, what Russia is doing right now in Crimea is the crime against humanity. The fourth thing, what Soviet Russia did in 1944 was a genocide. And we took in Polish Sejm the bill, the statement this summer confirming it. And I encourage your parliament to do the same in the near future. The fifth thing, Ukraine should be a member of NATO as soon as possible. And sixth, and I especially dedicated to all the leaders who are meeting right now in Kazan, in Russia, just a simple message. If you don't know where to stay, always stay on the side of the victim. Always stay on the side of the harmed, not at the side of the aggressor. And the seventh thing, sometimes they are telling us, and sometimes maybe we feel, and of course Ukrainian people has this right much more than we do have, that we are saying that we are fatigued by this war, that we are tired of thinking of it, of doing, of planning our actions to it. We should never be tired, never stop helping Ukraine. Patience, persistence, and consequence. This is the formula of peace for Europe, and this is the formula for the safe next generation of European citizens. Ukraine is Europe. Ukraine is member of a NATO family already because they are fighting on the right side. They are fighting for our own values. Sława Ukrainie.
Paldies!
Thank you, Shimon Holovnya. Now I give the floor to Lauri Husa, Speaker of the Riigikogu of the Republic of Estonia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, dear colleagues, dear Ukrainian friends, dear Ruslan. Just 2 days ago, you visited Tallinn, and during your visits in Estonia, our message was clear. Estonia will continue to strongly support Ukraine militarily, economically, and politically for long as it takes until Ukraine wins and beyond, until Crimea is returned to Ukraine, and until Ukraine becomes a member of EU and NATO. That was our very clear message. Ladies and gentlemen, we must do everything in our power to ensure that this war, one that began not in February 2022, but as it has been said already here several times, but with the illegal annexion of the Crimea 10 years ago, ends with Ukraine's victory and the restoration of its territorial integrity within international recognized borders. Estonia supports the victory plan, which allows Ukraine to take the initiative in its fight against the aggressor and pave the way for a just peace, to create the conditions necessary for fair and effective peace negotiations, military assistance, particularly air defense and ammunition, remains crucial. We must remove both mental and practical barriers that hinder Ukraine's ability to defend itself under international law, including its right to strike military targets on Russia's soil that threatens Ukraine. Estonia is committed to contributing 0.25% of our GDP annually to support Ukraine, and we call on our partners to make similar commitments. Dear colleagues, on 16th of October, the Parliament of Estonia, the Riigikogu, adopted a statement recognizing the mass deportations of Crimea Tatars by the Soviet Union in 1944 as an act of genocide. We also condemn the ongoing policy of genocide against Crimean Tatars in Crimea, which has been under Russian occupation since 2014. These policies include systematic detention, torture, kidnapping, and the suppression of their right to learn and use their native language. We call on the international community to show solidarity with the Crimean Tatars and call on the other parliaments which have not yet done so to adopt similar statements. Ladies and gentlemen, the restoration of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and the reaffirmation of the principles of the UN Charter are crucial for the future of all nations. This is why every nation must help Ukraine win, and why Estonia remains firm in its support. This war began in Crimea, and it will end in Crimea. Thank you, and Slava Ukraini.
Paldies, Lauri Hus.
Thank you, Mr. Husar. Now I give floor to Ms. Piropali, head of the Albanian Parliament, and then Mr. Faruji.
Your Excellency Speaker Mirina, Your Excellency Speaker Stefanchuk, honorable colleagues, speakers and representatives of parliaments, dear friends from Crimea. Support and solidarity in defending the sovereignty, territorial integrity, unity, and independence of Ukraine is a mission shared by all our countries, by all our parliaments. We are here in Riga to express our unwavering support to Ukraine and to safeguard international law. We are all appalled by Russia's crimes against Ukrainians, from the unprovoked aggression to the gross violations of international law, the bombings, murdering of civilians, kidnapping of children, deportations, the tragic fate of Tatars in Crimea, repression and cruelty are the marks of Russia's invasion. It is our obligation to hold Russia accountable for its crimes since 2014. Our meeting today at the third summit of the International Crimea Platform is also a contribution to the European and global security and demonstrates our determination to ensuring this happens through a fair peace. Crimea was the starting point of Russia's invasion. That is why the International Crimea Platform is our common effort to resist Russia's attempt to dismantle the rule-based international order. Ukraine is not only fighting for its liberation, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. It is fighting to uphold our shared rules and values, our way of life that is under severe attacks from an authoritarian regime that uses not only military weapons, but also misinformation and disinformation, cyber attacks, food security, election interference, and other deliberate acts of malicious attacks against all of us. Albania, its parliament, government, institution, and our people have been and will continue to stand firmly and unwaveringly in support of Ukraine's fight against Russia's aggression for as long as it takes. We all know war comes at a terrible price. The people of Ukraine, unfortunately, know this all too well. It is important we all support Ukraine's plan for a fair peace. The other options would be a permanent threat to our common security and a perpetual state of insecurity for Europe and beyond. Albania has been a reliable partner in this fight. One of the first countries aligning with sanctions against Russia and offering military equipment. The Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit in Tirana in February 2024 with the presence of President Zelensky, the high-level Ukraine Recovery and Reconstruction Conference in Berlin, the high-level Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland. At the later two, I had the honor and responsibility of representing Albania, and all the initiatives of the United States, EU, NATO, and the international community, the contribution as a co-pen holder with the United States during the non-permanent membership term in the Security Council from 2022 to 2023, where Albania was not only a strong partner and reliable, but also a very vocal one, are strong signs of our commitment that will not wither. Our firm support for Ukraine will continue not only for its liberation, but also for a just and lasting peace and the reconstruction of the country. This imposed war on Ukraine is a threat to the international order with unpredictable consequences. That is why it is important to never forget that Crimea is Ukraine and will always be, and no temporary occupation can change that. The alliance and solidarity with the authorities and the people of Ukraine is a fight to protect our civilization, build on the foundations of freedom, self-determination of peoples, and the sacred right of all people to decide on their own destiny. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Liels paldies, Elisei.
Thank you, Madam Spiropali. And now I give floor to Mr. Connolly, Speaker of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
Thank you. Friends, let's go back to the 1930s in this continent, in which the democracies collectively failed every test. In the Rhineland, when Hitler illegally reoccupied that territory in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. In Ethiopia, when Mussolini invaded to create a new colony and the collapse of the League of Nations followed. In the Spanish Civil War, in which brazenly Italian fascist pilots and Nazi German pilots actually bombed Republican positions in Spain, including that famous incident captured by Picasso in Guernica. In Kristallnacht, where we tis but did nothing. The Anschluss, uniting Austria with Germany. The Winter War in Finland, in which the Finns were left to fight for themselves. The craven handover of Sudetenland under pressure from Hitler by the Western powers. And the ultimate gobbling up of all of Czechoslovakia in violation of the Sudetenland Agreement. All of that led to Molotov-Ribbentrop and the carve up of Poland in World War II in 1939. Our collapse, our failure, our complacency, our unwillingness to stand up to aggression early. That generation failed its democratic test. We will not. We say to that depraved, sociopathic dictator in Kremlin, we will not yield. We won't repeat the mistakes of that generation. We will stand firm with Ukraine. We will not engage in fatigue. We will not engage in rationalization. We will not engage in equivocation. We will not engage in enabling behavior for you. We will not yield. The Irish poet Seamus Heaney talked about, don't even think about hope this side of the grave. But then he says, but then once in a lifetime comes along a moment of justice in which hope and history rhyme. In Ukraine, our moment, we will make hope and history rhyme. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Now I give the floor to Ms. Brown-Pivet, Speaker of the National Assembly of France, and she will be followed by Mr. Aguiar Branco.
Dear colleagues, 10 years since the Crimea and the Donbass have been submitted under Russian occupation. 10 years of shameless contempt of the United Nations Charter. As the name of this summit reminds us, dear colleagues, the Russian aggression did not begin on February the 24th, 2022, but since that date, the nature and scale of this aggression have changed. How can we tolerate bombs targeting schools, energy infrastructure, hospitals? How can we not be outraged by the deportation of children, the threats of nuclear apocalypse, cynical food blackmail? But in the face of this war of aggression, Ukraine is not alone. Dear Daiga Mieringa, thank you for bringing together Ukraine's allies here in Latvia, a free nation that knows firsthand what it means to be under the yoke of its Russian neighbor. Our commitment is unequivocal. Our democracies will not waver. This is the message of solidarity and firmness that I reaffirmed to President Zelensky on June 7th in Paris. Addressing the French MPs on the day after the 80th anniversary of the Normandy landings, Zelensky said, "We are proud to be the heirs of those soldiers who came from different countries but shared the same determination to see freedom triumph." 80 years on, our democracies are once again being put to the test. This war thus concerns each of our nations, each of our assemblies, for we are the voices of free people from the Atlantic to the Baltic, from Moldova to Georgia. Yes, we want peace in Ukraine, but not a capitulation. We want a peace that respects the will of the Ukrainian people, that respects international law. I therefore reaffirm France's support for President Zelensky's victory plan and the Second Peace Conference. France is playing its full part. Just last Thursday, Paris organized the conference to ensure Ukraine's nuclear security in the long term. However, winning the peace means not losing the war. Thus, let me be clear, on every front, military, economic, or humanitarian, French support remains total and unwavering. It would be a serious mistake to bank on the lassitude of our opinion. Putin does not expect our support. He is hoping for our indifference. We want peace, but we also want justice. Russia must be held to account for turning rape into a weapon of war, for deporting children. There will be no impunity. To that end, we must support the ICC, which has issued arrest warrants for 6 Russian leaders, including Vladímir Putin. Dear colleagues, the future of Ukraine is being decided now. But if that future is want to be of peace, we need robust security guarantees. France supports the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO. Yes, Ukraine is destined to join the great transatlantic family, just as we will be join the European Union. And here I would like to pay tribute to the exemplary progress that Ukraine is making, dear Ruslan, in meeting the accession criteria. The Ukrainian colors, azure and gold, are also those of the European flag. This is not an accident, it is destiny.
Liels paldies, Jēl.
Thank you, Ms. Brown-Pivet. Now I give the floor to Mr. Aguiar Branco, Speaker of the Portuguese Parliament, followed by a video message by Mr. Greg Fergus.
We are here today because the world cannot stay indifferent. We are here today because the world cannot tolerate what is happening in Ukraine. Violating other countries' territorial integrity is not correct. Attempting against another nation's sovereignty is not acceptable. Human rights violations must be condemned without hesitation. What Russia is doing in Ukraine is not only a problem of Ukraine, nor of Europe, nor of NATO. It is a problem of the world. What is at stake is the rule-based international order. This is not something that can be taken lightly. International law is the only antidote against the law of the stronger weapon. We may argue this rule-based order could be improved, but a world without it would be much worse. This is why it's so important to counter Russian narratives, especially in other regions of the world, that make it sound okay to invade, to kill, to lie, to disrespect international recognized borders. No, it's not okay. No, it's not acceptable. Democracy and freedom depend on not accepting. In Portugal, we recognize the cost of winning and keeping democracies, and we cherish the liberty we conquered after the Carnation Revolution. Maybe this explains why a country like Portugal, in the most western part of Europe, with stable borders for many centuries, never doubted the importance of supporting Ukraine. There were, and still is, consensus amongst all different political forces in Parliament regarding the support to Ukraine. But at the same time, Portugal keeps stressing the importance of the southern flank to the war efforts on the east. Russian narrative and influence keeps spreading. The only outcome acceptable of the conflict is the victory of Ukraine. The world cannot settle for peace solutions where bits and pieces of territory are exchanged for some vague and uncertain promise of peace. Territorial integrity matters. Ukraine's territorial integrity matters. Crimea matters. Thank you.
Liels paldies, José Pedro.
Thank you, Mr. Aguiar Branco. Now, the video message by Greg Fergus, Speaker of the House of Commons of Canada.
Dear friends and colleagues, fellow speakers and
Thank you to Mr. Fergus for this video address. Now I will give the floor to Ms. Chminita Nielsen, Speaker of the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania.
Dear Ruslan, dear colleagues, let me start by thanking our Latvian hosts for organizing the third Crimean platform and for warmly welcoming us here in Riga. We are gathered here because parliamentary diplomacy matters, and as leaders and representatives of our parliaments, we have an important role in dealing with the most pressing issues. And today, hardly anything is more important than helping Ukraine defend and eventually prevail against Russia's aggression. Having crossed more than 10 years since the beginning of Russia's aggression in 2014 and nearing the third year of full-scale war, we should reflect on the developments. It is painful yet necessary to admit that while efforts in our respective countries, in alliances, unions to help Ukraine were substantial, the war of attrition works for Russia and its autocratic allies. The cost of war is bearable. Sanctions adopted so far do not have the intended crippling effect on Russia's economy. During this time, Ukrainians have not only been acting as brave defenders of their own violated home, but also as the guards keeping the floodgates of aggression shut for the benefit of the rest of Europe. Should their efforts fail, the aggression may certainly spill over and create many more unbearable dilemmas for the Western democratic world. Therefore, as representatives of parliaments, we must unite our efforts on two tracks: supporting Ukraine in what it needs most and raising awareness about the need to boost our own respective defenses. Coming from Lithuania, a country on the NATO's eastern flank, I can attest to the particular pressures we face. The urgent need for deterrence and defense is not just a concept, but reality. Nationally, we allocate more than 3% of GDP to defense in 2024 and plan to raise the expenditure, potentially reaching 3.5% in the years to come. However, we understand clearly that the best investment in our own defense is helping Ukraine. For that, we should act on ensuring sustainable, long-term financial commitment to supporting Ukraine by all of our respective countries. 0.25% of GDP allocated to Ukraine is a reachable baseline that many countries, including Lithuania, have already committed to. Increasing efforts to ensure the smooth accession of Ukraine to the EU and the invitation to become a member of NATO. That would send a clear signal to Russia that they cannot terrorize Ukraine and bully us, the Western world, into submission with their threats. Continuing pressure on Russia with more effective sanctions, the so-called axis of evil only becomes emboldened by hesitation or ineffectiveness, as evidenced by North Korea directly joining the war against Ukraine. Fully supporting President Zelensky's peace plan and the recently announced victory plan that outlines the most important concrete steps that are necessary for Ukraine to prevail, making sure that Ukraine receives all the military support it needs and receives it in time. This support should come without strings attached or limitations. Ukraine has the sovereign right to defend itself under international law, to repel attacks from both Russia and the territories it occupies. Dear colleagues, there is much talk about red lines. We have seen over and over again that these lines are often self-imposed, playing into the hands of Kremlin, allowing it to exploit our fears and our hesitations. And when dealing with such regimes as Putin's Russia, we should remind ourselves that weakness is escalation, indecision is escalation, and failure to adequately support Ukraine is escalation. Our decisions must reflect the unwavering dedication to deterrence and defense, support to Ukraine, and strategic response to global threats. Thank you, and Slava Ukraini.
Dear colleagues, we must currently interrupt the plenary session because I now have the honor to welcome the President of Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, who has joined us remotely from Ukraine. Honorable Mr. President, thank you for finding the time. Welcome to the Parliamentary Summit of the International Crimea Platform. Please, the floor is yours.
Mēs jūs nedzirdam.
Unfortunately, we cannot hear you.
Дуже дякую, дорога Латвія.
Thank you very much. Dear Latvia, dear participants of the Crimean Platform Summit, dear friends, I'm very happy to see you all at the third summit of the International Crimean Platform. Thank you for your participation in the summit. Thank you for your kind words about Ukraine and thank you for your support. The number of state flags in this hall clearly indicates that Russia has failed in the most important thing they were trying to achieve. Since 2014, in particular, Putin has failed to commit international crime, part of the new normal for the nations of the world. To seize the land of other people, other nation, to seize Crimean land, it will never be accepted by the international community. For all countries, it is equally valuable to preserve sovereignty of the states, territorial integrity of the states, and the right to determine their own future. And this is the foundation of the UN Charter. And it is not acceptable that someone may decide on the life and fate of other nation, other neighboring people, or deport them. The UN Charter is about true peace, not about how to normalize war. And currently, some leaders of the states have gathering in Kazan. It is Putin's summit. At the same time, they consider moving military personnel from North Korea closer to the boundary to the border with Ukraine, using the slogan preventing the war. However, we know that this is against the fundamental human values and the UN Charter. At the G20 summit in Indonesia almost 2 years ago, I proposed a peace formula that could restore the full effectiveness of the goals and principles of the UN Charter and actually protect lives from aggression. And this is not just about Ukraine. If we want to end this war in a just and fair way, to make sure that no other nation can plan similar aggression, we have to consolidate efforts and to unite to defend international law. I ask all of you to be active and unconcerned. The criminal should not benefit from this war. We have to stand up in this struggle that is going on. It is actually going on in Ukraine. And in a similar way, we must stand up to the battle diplomatically in the realm of diplomacy. We have to strengthen Ukraine and our common goals and common positions. Ukraine has presented a victory plan to its partners. It contains all the necessary components to deprive Russia of any alternatives it is currently counting on, except for a just peace. The first thing is that Ukraine has long merited geopolitical certainty, and invitation to NATO is a part of this geopolitical certainty, and it is the right of every democratic nation in Europe. Secondly, we all are interested in that Putin is not successful at the front. Thirdly, it is essential for everyone that this war ends and does not resume. Fourthly, economic cooperation. We have to work together to increase well-being of our nations. And fifthly, we have to guarantee reliable security. And all this is provided in the victory plan. I request all of you to advocate these points in your nations, with your governments. And we will see, I believe, we will see Russia at the Peace Summit once the victory plan is fully implemented. And in this way, we will see that the goals and principles of the UN Charter are fully restored. Today, on the International Day of the United Nations, it is especially essential to state this, that UN was created for promotion of common goals and values, and cooperation, as our cooperation within the framework of the international Crimean platform. It is true evidence of our commitment to pursuing these goals, and it is happening here, demonstration of our commitment to the common principles and values, and not in Kazan. Thank you all for your contribution to helping to fight for justice, and especially for those who need to be released from captivity, from occupation. And I especially welcome representatives of Crimean Tatar people that participate in this summit. In particular, Mr. Jalal, who has been through repression and imprisonment in Russia, and his liberation is a demonstration of the fact that through consolidated efforts, we may achieve great results. And nowhere in the world there should be place for such things as occupation, captivity, or deportation. We must achieve true peace. Glory to Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your inspiring speech. Thank you very much. And now we will proceed with our session. The next speaker is Mr. Frank Ebner, the Speaker of the Austrian Federal Assembly.
Sehr geehrter Herr Vorsitzender Stefanschuk, Vertreter der Parlamentarischen.
Dear President, Chairman Stefanschuk, Madam Speaker, honorable representatives of the Parliamentary Assemblies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking our host from the Latvian and Ukrainian parliaments for organizing and hosting this important platform. The situation in Crimea and Ukraine remains of paramount concern to Europe and the global community. It's been said that we are now marking 10 years since the illegal annexation of Crimea, and we will soon mark 1,000 days since Russia started its illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and unleashing unimaginable destruction and suffering on a sovereign and independent neighbor. From the very start of Russia's war of aggression, Austria has been standing with Ukraine and its people, who continue to bravely resist Russia's aggression and brutality. It is evident that Russia must not get away with its crimes. Austria, a country that is militarily but not politically neutral, will remain steadfast in its unwavering commitment to an independent, free, and prosperous Ukraine, with its internationally recognized borders, and also to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. The intolerable atrocities on the Ukrainian mainland, which are in the focus of the media, must not lead to us overlooking the ongoing grave human rights violations in Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. We condemn the ongoing militarization of the peninsula, the forced passportization, the suppression of Ukrainian identity and the language, as well as the persecution and discrimination of the indigenous Crimean Tatar people. Dear colleagues, we, who are fortunate enough not to live in a country that is being under attack by another, cannot take freedom and security for granted. In its defense against Russia's war of aggression, Ukraine continues to defend our common values and principles as well. And we must also remain vigilant in our own territories and constantly protect and further develop our democracies, which are under multiple threats, be it through the belligerence of autocrats and terrorist organizations or through disinformation or fake news. We must constantly ensure and further develop democracies. We must also use parliaments more strongly as platforms to work with international partners to educate citizens about the eminent significance of democratic values and also to counter false narratives and fake news on all occasions, wherever this is possible. And no matter how often Russia may continue to spread misinformation or fake news, we must reiterate the fact Crimea is Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Paldies vēlreiz.
Thank you once again to Mr. Ebner, and I now give the floor to Mr. Jussi Halla-aho, Speaker of the Eduskunta, the Parliament of Finland, followed by one more video address.
On behalf of everyone, I wish to thank the Saima and Speaker Mierinja for hosting and organizing this event. The full-scale war in Ukraine has raged for more than 2.5 years. Mr. Putin's initial plan to take Kyiv in 3 days with blitzkrieg failed because he underestimated the ability of the Ukrainians to resist and the willingness of the West to respond, and overestimated the capabilities of his own military. However, we have no reason to celebrate. Mr. Putin believes that time is working for him and that he will eventually win by attrition. Unfortunately, he may be right. The ability of the Russian society to absorb human, material, and economic losses is immense. If we want to end this war and prevent a new Russian aggression in the future, we must make it clear to Mr. Putin that time is not on his side, and that we will not run out of material or resolve. This means that we must invest much more in our physical capacity to produce weapons and ammunition and allocate more money in the long term to material help to Ukraine and to our own defense. Many countries are already doing their fair share and even more. I want to mention especially the Baltic states. But we need a bigger contribution from everyone, and especially from big players, because with an adversary like Russia, it is the absolute numbers that make the difference. We must also stop being intimidated by the Russians and lift the restrictions that some countries have put on the use of the Western weapons that they have provided to Ukraine. Insufficient and restricted aid only encourages the Russians, prolongs this war, and increases the risk of a wider conflict. For more than 2 years, we have repeated the mantra that we will help Ukraine for as long as is necessary. But as long as is necessary is not enough. It is equally important that we help Ukraine as much as is needed to achieve our goal. And that goal must be a Russian defeat, because we, any of us, cannot afford a Russian victory. Thank you. Paldies.
Jā, liels paldies.
Thank you very much, to Mr. Hal Aho. We now have a video address from Mr. Jerry Brownlee, House of Representatives of New Zealand.
My name is Jerry Brownlee, and I'm the Speaker of the New Zealand House of Representatives. It's a privilege to represent the New Zealand Parliament virtually at the third Parliamentary Summit of the International Crimea Platform. The New Zealand Parliament is proud of our relationship with Ukraine, and we continue to stand in solidarity with you and to condemn unequivocally Russia's ongoing war of aggression. We will continue to support Ukraine at international parliamentary forums and events, including the Interparliamentary Union. Every day, New Zealanders follow the events in Ukraine closely, reading of and viewing the violent and brutal aggression of Russia's attacks, and also empathizing with those who have suffered horrific losses as a result of this conflict. At the same time, we as a nation admire the determination of the Ukrainian people to beat back and defeat the Russian aggressor. Earlier this year, I was proud to welcome members of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine to the New Zealand Parliament for a week-long visit. It was a privilege to meet with the Ukrainian delegation and to hear firsthand what's happening in the communities that they represent and to the people that they care about. We agreed that preservation of the rules-based system, which has allowed the free world to prosper both economically and socially, must see Russia defeated. Although New Zealand is geographically distant, we continue to stand beside you through these most challenging times. As we would say in New Zealand, kia kaha I hoa ma, stand tall, my friends.
Paldies, Gērijam Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Gary Brownlee. And now we will have two more speakers in this part of the plenary session. So I give the floor to Ms. Anita Dimitriou, Speaker of the House of Representatives of Cyprus, followed by Mr. Afrim Gashi, Speaker of the Assembly of the Republic of North Macedonia.
Thank you so much. Madam President, dear Ruslan, dear colleagues, we are here once again to reaffirm at the parliamentary level the international community support to Ukraine on this ongoing fight for freedom and democracy. And we need to keep repeating that this brutal invasion is an attack on legality, on international law, an attack on all of us. And we stand before a great challenge because unless we rise to aggression and injustice, they will keep surfacing, especially in today's turbulent political arena with propaganda and populism, unfortunately, sometimes to prevail. We therefore strongly deplore the recent Russian attacks against Ukrainian energy and port infrastructure and grain exports, disrupting the energy and food supplies with dire consequences. I personally reiterate Cyprus' unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity on the basis of international law, which should always serve as a beacon on the way forward. Our solidarity with the Ukrainian people needs to remain strong, and Russia needs to keep accountable for all the crimes committed. Russia's annexation for the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, the city of Sevastopol, and other Ukrainian regions is illegal, null and void. Cyprus will never accept attempts to unilaterally change the internationally recognized borders of a sovereign state through military aggression, not in Ukraine, not in Cyprus, not anywhere in the world. Dear colleagues, Cyprus cannot control double standards or the so-called situation of frozen conflicts, because what is
tragically and dangerously unfolding today also in the Middle East, proves that no conflict can remain frozen, as it can easily ignite, endangering peace and stability. We need to continue provide all possible assistance to Ukraine, to keep contributing to the EU for Ukraine fund and stand firm by Ukraine's rightful claims for compensation from Russia. And that is why we welcome the establishment of the Council of Europe Register as a mechanism addressing the consequences of the aggression of Ukraine. Dear colleagues, let us repeat that we are here to reaffirm our support for Ukraine's European aspirations and our readiness to assist this friendly nation of ours during this EU course. Together, we shall strive for a peaceful, secure, and bright future that the Ukrainian people deserved. And allow me to say that I do hope that this will be the case for my country as well, as a perspective of a new clause of negotiations under the auspices of the UN within the UN framework seems to emerge. We do hope that all these efforts will be fruitful for Cyprus, for Ukraine, for peace, for legality, for democracy. We need it more than ever. Slava Ukrainian.
Paldies, Anitai Dimitriu.
Thank you, Ms. Dimitriou. And now, dear colleagues, we have the opportunity to hear the last speaker before the break. And afterwards, I remind you, we will have a family photo and a coffee break. And now I give the floor to Mr. Gashi, Speaker of the Assembly of the Republic of North Macedonia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Madam Daiga, dear my friend Ruslan, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to begin by saying that it's a great honor for me to be here today with my colleagues, presidents of parliaments of democratic states, all united in supporting Ukraine and Crimea in their efforts to defend against Russian aggression and preserve their territorial integrity and sovereignty. This battle is not, it should not be Ukraine's battle. It is also our battle, a battle of all democratic forces, because we must stand together and fight against anyone who would violate territorial integrity and sovereignty, international law and principles, and use aggression to annex foreign lands while causing immense injustice and suffering to innocent civilians. I am incredibly honored, but I am deeply saddened that in a few months we will mark 3 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These 3 years have been filled with sorrow, innocent lives being lost, homes being destroyed, with millions of Ukrainians being uprooted, carefree childhoods being taken, an entire generation of Ukrainian youngsters being devastated. We see this in Crimea and Ukraine, and unfortunately, we see it in the Middle East as well. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, by being here today, we reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the principles that unite us: respect for territorial integrity, sovereignty, and the right to self-determination. The situation in Crimea is not merely a regional concern. It is a global challenge to the international rules-based order. The ongoing occupation and annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation is a clear violation of international law, and it is our collective responsibility to address this injustice. Today, as we gather here to express our strong support not only for Ukraine and Crimea, but also for the democratic values we all strive for: freedom, peace, and respect for human rights, we mark a significant anniversary, 8 years since the deportation for the Crimean Tatars from their ancestral homes. Unfortunately, Crimea and Ukraine are still facing new injustices 8 decades later. For this reason, we must unite our response to these injustices. We must do everything in our power to break this chain of conflicts and ensure peace. Finally, on behalf of the Assembly of the Republic of North Macedonia and on my own behalf, I would like to reaffirm our support for the Ukrainian people and state with all our capabilities until Ukraine is fully free. Slava Ukraina! Thank you very much.
Paldies, paldies.
Thank you, Mr. Gashi. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will now have a half an hour break. I would like to ask all the heads of delegation to proceed to the Alpha Hall for the family photo. It is the same room we had the official greeting in the morning. So staff of the summit will show you the way to the hall. Outside of the halls, there's coffee and small refreshments, and our session will resume at exactly 11:30. So 11:30, let us all come back here.